All right, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Barry, and I'm here with Matt Zaun. And we are spontaneously coming together in a live video, bringing together both of our journeys and our passions of our career, from brand storytelling to persuasion theory to selling and marketing and kind communication habits and tactics that you can take on your leadership journey. And we met on LinkedIn, and we're all in this pandemic together, and we came together and thought, well, why not do an interview where we can actually talk to each other, bring our worlds together, because that's what the whole world is doing right now, and it's uniting, and showcase to everyone out there that is working from home, who's transitioning, that we can all do something different. And the more we use our minds in a different way, the more comfortable we can be. And I also think of this as an opportunity for the two of us and for other people to start saying yes to more opportunities. So I'm just going to thank you, Matt, for saying yes to doing this with me. And
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
And you're a brand storyteller. I mean, this is so cool. I've done 17 TEDx events. I love the idea of storytelling and getting your idea out. What inspired you to do what it is that you do and share with the world?
Sure. So I originally started in the political space. I was a political speechwriter for dozens of different politicians, working on political messaging, working on debate prep, primarily how to thrive in hostile speaking environments. And there were a lot of CEOs and executives and sales professionals that I would talk with, and I would explain to them different messaging strategies that we utilize in the political world. And a lot of those strategies, it was almost like a novel concept to them. They had never heard of some of these different ideas before. So I utilize political messaging strategy with how to really connect with an audience, but from a business perspective. So I primarily focus on workshops, one-on-one coaching, and I still work with politicians, but I also work with executives, sales professionals, CEOs, on really the psychology of inspiration and how to strategically take different stories and connect with their audiences.
That's beautiful. I think the idea of working with politicians and that's why you have persuasion theory with brand storytelling, because in order to be a politician, you have to persuade people. You have to say either go to this side or that side, and then bringing that into the business world. That's really interesting for business people to start thinking in those ways, because some of the best politicians out there are the people and the leaders who can speak with brevity and with eloquence, and those are the ones that make history, right?
Sure. And a lot of from the backside of that, a lot of those individuals that people consider, oh, they're so witty, right? They're so natural. A lot of them have spent countless hours really honing their craft and really working behind the scenes to get to that level. Some of the greatest orators that we look at and say, oh, well, they were amazing at razzling and dazzling their audiences. A lot of them spend a tremendous amount of time getting to that level. One of the most offensive things, I don't know if you could speak to this, but from a speaking perspective, is when people say, oh, wow, you're so natural. Oftentimes it's been quite the process to appear natural, and there's a lot of time and a lot of agony, to be honest with you, that goes into that.
You know, I think that's such a great point, because that topic came up today in one of my calls, where we look at all of these leaders, and you use the word orator and someone in history that we all marvel at and say, wow, you're such a natural, or like a business leader. And people say, oh, you have your stuff together. And, you know, there are so many business folks, and I'm sure you get this too in your profession, that they would say, well, I don't need a coach. I have it all together. And you look at the greatest leaders out there are the people who have the coach, the therapist, and all of the people behind them, the speech coach, telling them how to be great, telling them how to share a stage and look into the eyes of an audience and be charismatic in their communication and in the approach. And I think that more people, especially today, should start to think about going beyond the ego, which is my body of work, my platform, kind communication of how to get to that possibility and purpose. But in order to do that, you have to go beyond that mask of thinking that you have it all together, because when you're a life learner, when you're a consistent life learner, that's when you're really open up, and that's where you become, as you said, the natural.
Sure, sure. And more people may be forced into that world post COVID-19. People may need to really branch out and network with people and ask for help and really seek out mentorship, because who knows what the world will look like after this is all over, and who knows if that is even going to happen. And by the end of this year, we're in uncharted territory. So my suggestion to people is really take a step back, really look at what you have now and figure out, where do you go from here? How do you reinvent yourself? How do you really stay innovative and use your creativity to really push your passions into the world? And I think that's going to be a lot of questions that people have to ask themselves.
Yeah, and it stems from getting over the fear of asking the question. It stems from the curiosity of thinking, what if? And thinking about what the possibilities are. Just like you and I together here today, I think one of the greatest points that I want to make to people is to say yes more. I mean, I talk about boundary setting. You talk about boundary setting as a coach and as a workshop host. And I'm sure that comes up a lot, of how to say no to things so that we're not taking on way too many things and then our frustrations get the best of us. But there's a big part of my body of work that asks leaders and clients and marketers and executives to say yes more to opportunity and get out of the schedule, get out of the rigidity, so that the possibility is able to not only knock at the door, but enter in. And I think that's what we're doing here together, right? It's just like coming together and bringing kindness and persuasion and brand storytelling together to say, look at what we can create together. What can you do too? How can we inspire you to do that?
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned saying yes more. So I was actually involved in improv comedy for quite some time, about 4 years. And for anyone listening to this that knows anything about improv comedy, the basis is a concept called yes and. And
Yeah.
typically there's two different exercises that you do. There's yes and then there's yes but. And one of the things that I work on in my workshops is I have people do this exercise, and the whole premise very, very quickly is you have people go back and forth saying yes and. So someone may say something radical, and then the next person needs to say yes and then they need to add to it, right? And then you do a complete switch and you do yes but. So the interesting thing is, most people that love the yes and exercise the most have a more positive view of the world around them. And the yes butchers, if you will, have more of a skeptical view. And it's not that one world philosophy is better than another, but if you really want to get those creative juices in your mind flowing, you want to adopt a yes and mentality, because a yes and is creative, and yes but is critical, right? You have to get to the point where you say, if this is true, what else is true? If this is true, what else is true? And from a messaging perspective, that's so paramount, because if you throw something out and you say, I think this organization is great because of this. Let's say an organization is great because they're really good at marketing, right? Well, if that's true, then what else is true? They must have a marketing team. And if that's true, they must have people in HR that know how to hire talent for their marketing team, or they could really develop skills within. And then if that's true, so basically you start peeling back all these different layers of messaging, and one single thought leads to about 100 different things. And it's all going based on what you said, the whole mentality of saying yes, right? Because yes, and it's such a creative process. And if you put that mentality in anyone, I don't care who it is, if they're an executive, CEO, if they're a high-level politician and they're running, like if they have a massive constituency, right? If they have the mentality of yes and, it's going to really have this creative process flow, and it's a real beautiful thing to see.
This is so cool. We haven't met before. We don't know anything, but I also use that in my workshop.
Yeah, that's funny.
And I call it yes and no because. So,
Nice.
and that's so, it's so powerful, and your perspective is great. And the way that I use it in my workshops for kind communication is to show people the art of possibility, especially in the office and the way we speak to each other. So for managers and teams, most of the time managers might be no because, and they're not acknowledged. It's all about acknowledgement, right? And the
Sure.
power of the positivity and giving someone a nod, and focusing on creativity. And I love the fact that you're using that example, and we both use it in both our workshops in separate ways. And one of the things that I found the most that was like a really great result was that the people, when they haven't been exposed to that experience before, they're like, oh my God, this is so much fun. It's so much fun to say yes. And when their partner was the one that was saying no more, they didn't like it at all. They were like, and they also said, the other thing that I got at my last workshop was, they said, this is the no because is really hard. They said it's really hard to start to come up with
Sure.
all of those things. So, you know, it just presents an idea for all of us to say, how about yes? And how do we get to that yes? Well, we go beyond the fear. And how do we know we're doing it right or wrong? Well, we just kind of start to put it out there. And the more, you obviously know, the more you fail or you make a mistake or you falter, the better the rise, the quicker the rise, and the more experience
Sure.
to pick up the pieces and to learn better the next time. So say yes more.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, it's not just philosophical. There is an element of profit to this as well. And what I mean by that, if you have a high level manager in a company and they basically created this culture of yes and having and saying yes as much as possible, think about all the different people that report to that individual. If they're continuing to say yes, think of all those ideas that are created. Think of all that creativity. Think of all the innovation. Think of right now, what's amazing right now that's happening is so many people are stuck at home and so many people are being innovative with how they stay on task, innovative with time management and how they connect with their teammates. And all of this is really spurring on the next wave of creativity. And then imagine another manager that tells their team no, no, no all the time, and they squash creativity and they squash ideas. Their team's not going to be willing to share different ideas with them. And I just, from a profit perspective, don't we want to be viewing companies in a sense of how can we really reach out to people and connect with people to spur on ideas so it continues to build the company, build the organization, ultimately add to those missions. So yeah, it's not only philosophically sound, but it's also sound from a profit perspective from a business.
Yeah, I wrote an article and I posted it today. And I think one of the things that was so poignant about it was that, you know, companies lose approximately $37 billion in profit due to a lack of poor communication in the office. $37
That's
billion.
crazy.
And it's you know, it based on theories, if an executive or an employee makes $35,000 a year, it's going to cost the company $7,000 to replace them. So when you
Sure.
think about all of this possibility and purpose and getting over the philosophical point, right? Because CEOs want the bottom line. Everyone at the top of the management chain wants to know, what's the bottom line? How is this going to affect my business? Well, the profitability in storytelling and persuasion and showing up as a kinder individual using kind communication tactics is that people are going to be more productive. They're going to be happier.
Sure.
Their butts are going to be in seats. There's going to be less seats that are going to be rotating, because when people get the proper training, like with people like yourself and I, and they get properly coached to interact together in ways that make sense and the ways that make them feel comfortable in the office space, whether they're working from home now, they're still going to have to go back into the office to do this. So profitability definitely has something to do with the art of saying yes and being a happier, healthier adult. I'm calling it
Sure.
you know, the second half of our lives. When our second half of our lives are happier and healthier, we're more productive at work. And I call it in my new book, it's the new book that I have out is called Design Your Mind to Be Kind. It's about changing your habits in real time. And I think most of us don't think that we can change. Most of us are the people who say, no, 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 I am who I am. I beg to differ. And my books, my coaching, my practices take you into that. And how do you feel about the people that you've coached about changing habits? And what have you seen from the possibility perspective of people that have said yes and have changed their habits in real time?
Sure. So from a connecting standpoint, so what's interesting is before coronavirus was talked about, right, before it became big, especially here in the United States, a lot of people were focused on the idea of artificial intelligence, right? And that became a huge talking point politically. It became a big talking point culturally, right? In conversation, what is AI going to do to the workplace? And what's interesting that a lot of people aren't thinking about this crisis, because it's definitely a crisis, but what good may come out of it is one thing that AI cannot do is it cannot show empathy, right? And I think empathy is a powerful connector. It's powerful in sales, it's powerful with teams, it's powerful in business. Empathy is huge. And I think that there's going to be this wave of empathy that comes out of this. And I think that it's going to really shift and change different aspects of business. And one of the things that I've been saying for a very long time is that the next generation, right? The next generation is millennials that are going to take over a lot of the leadership positions in companies. And the big cultural wave right now is corporate social responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big things regarding that space is empathy, right? And it's really branching out to the community. And it's not just how much profit can a business make, it's how big of an impact can a business have. And
Mm-hmm.
artificial intelligence cannot have empathy, and you cannot program anything to have empathy. Empathy it's a human emotion, right? It's something that we can connect with people. So to answer your question, I really think that there's going to be a huge wave of empathy that comes out of it. I think it's going to really change different elements of leadership in the future. And I feel like if people are not willing to be authentic and they're not willing to step out and they're not willing to really connect, I think a lot of those people are going to get lost.
Interesting. Interesting. I love that because my whole body of work has been based on empathy and
Oh,
compassion.
that's
Here's
good. That's
the
good. That's
past
good for
couple of
you, right?
years, I'm like, let's make this boom.
Yeah, there you
My
go.
computer is ready to go. You know, I feel like for the past couple of years, I've been working towards this, and now I have the 2 books on the kindness innovation, what I'm calling it. And I feel like I've been knocking on doors of businesses talking about empathy and compassion, and certain people are starting to get it. I was brought in this year, before this happened, by several large companies that said, well, we want an empathy approach, and we want a coach to come
Oh,
in and
wow.
hire us. And
That's
let's
great.
hire a coach. So I was like, great, there are people out there. There's a few gems out there, but I really hope you're right, Matt, that there's going to be companies out there that understand the value and the importance of empathy. And I think that the best way to do that is through the coaching that we do, because what I've seen in a lot of the marketing companies that I've been coaching within, there's a lot of fear-based management. And when the leadership is not empathetic, when the leadership is not compassionate, when they blur lines of communication, they kind of create that fear, and people are reacting all the time. It's like everyone is a reactionary. That's where constructive criticism isn't open. And people are disruptive, and they're defensive, and they're aggressive, and they're passive aggressive. So I'm really hoping that you're right. And I think that the whole idea of what we're doing tonight, to just put this idea out there for everyone, that we can all unite and come together. And look at what we did. We became newfound friends, new business colleagues. Both of us are in the same type of fields, 2 different methods, from politics, and from mine was from marketing. And now we're doing the same things. We're using yes and no because, or yes and yes because. And I think that this is a really great opportunity for us to show, as leaders in
Sure.
what we do, that you can create possibility in anything. And like the lotus flower grows in the muck and in the mud. I think that this is a great example of that. So I thank
Sure.
you for being one with me tonight. And what would be like your tip or tactic to leave everyone with based on our conversation to let them go home and think about how they can take what we said and let it simmer in there?
Sure. So just from the empathy perspective, so empathy is really birthed through pain, right? In order for someone to really show empathy, they must first have had to gone through a trial or tribulation. And I've been really processing lately conversations that I had with my grandmother, because my grandmother, the Great Depression shaped her, right? And it made her an individual that was able to connect with people like you could never imagine, right? She had this ability to really connect with people to their core and inspire them. And she really got that from pain she went through in the Great Depression. Now, I hate to relate this time period to then, because there's a lot of differences from an economic perspective. But the point, I think, is still the same, that she went through tremendous pain, so she was able to connect. And there are a lot of people out there now that are going through pain, and they will be able to connect in the future. My biggest suggestion to people is, because your day probably has shifted where you're not commuting, right? So for anyone who's listening that, was driving back and forth to the office, your day shifted. So you have a little bit of time back. I would challenge everyone listening to this to take the time that you got back and really focus on building a story bank. And to me, what a story bank is coming up with stories that really surround different emotions. Okay. And I do deep dives in my trainings in this, but basically there are common human emotions, right? So think of excitement, think of anger, think of fear, think of sadness, think of surprise and interest, right? So all of these are emotions that we feel as human beings, and everyone should have a story that they can figuratively bring out at the drop of a hat regarding one of those emotions. So we need to connect with people on an emotional level. And oftentimes when people ask us a question, we think, wow, I hear words. What kind of words can I say to these words, right? But the real thought that we should have is, I hear the question. What's the emotional root to that question? And do I have a story that I can bring up to really connect with that emotion? Well, you have to have your story bank in place in order to really bring out these different messages and stories. So my challenge, the technique, if you will, it's not necessarily a technique, but it's sit down and really spend time developing your story bank and thinking about different messages that you can plug in, right? We had talked about empathy and being authentic, right? Right now, there's a lot of people in corporate America that they're home and they're playing teacher with their children and they're working a job, right? So there's a lot of stories that you can develop based on that life situation. And why does that matter from a business perspective? Well, if you want to connect with your teammates better than you ever thought possible, what better stories regarding family and friends and all these different situations that we're going through? So I would really recommend and challenge people to sit down, really think about these different stories, start building a story bank. Literally, I would put on a sheet of paper, excited, angry, fearful, sad, right? Putting out, listing different emotions, and then what stories can you put in those categories, and really start processing these stories so that when the time comes that you need to share that story, you will be ready to go.
Amazing, amazing. I'm a 17-time TEDx curator. I've coached speakers to the stages to come up with one great idea, and that is a wonderful exercise for so many public speakers, for people that are taking meetings, and I applaud you on that. And I'll take it up one notch with my body of work. I call that, in reacting and responding, I call it becoming a solutions-based thinker and speaker.
Sure.
And in the
Sure.
new book, Design Your Mind to Be Kind, it's a chapter in there and it flows throughout the book. But the idea is, when most of us are asked a question and we don't have our story bank and we don't have anything to answer, and we're too busy, or we're rushed, or we're stressed, or we're distressed, we react, or we don't acknowledge, and we just throw people to the wayside. And or if we don't know an answer, we just dismiss it. But I think one of the greatest things is taking that story bank idea and becoming a solutions-based thinker and speaker. So what that means is that when someone asks you a question, not only do you have your story, but you're having a solution to it. Instead of saying no, you come up with a more positive response. And I think that plays into the whole empathy thing, and that plays into the authenticity, not into the ego, which is, you know, the leader and the busy one and the person who has no time for everybody or is too busy with their head down on their desk, but actually face up, looking at people in the eyes, coming up with solutions. If you might not have the answer, instead of a reaction, a positive, empathetic, and compassionate response to people is going to be profitable for your business. It's going to be productive for your teams, whether you're a manager or just an employee, or maybe you're a small business or a startup that is looking for ways to empower the team players inside of everything that you're doing right now, whether small or large. I mean, this is the time to really tap into all of these things that we're talking about and focus on the now, focus on the positivity, create your story bank, be a solutions-based thinker and speaker, say yes and more, and make it out of this with a lot of great things that you're going to change when this comes out, and start to change us now. So
Sure.
this was beautiful. Thank you so much, Matt. How can people find you? I mean, I'll also put your website or any contact information,
Sure.
but where can they find you?
Sure. I think the best source is LinkedIn. That's how we met each other. LinkedIn, I put a tremendous amount of content out on LinkedIn. You can also check me out at my website. First name is Matt. That's with 2 T's. Last name is Zaun. It's spelled Zaun. So it's mattzaun.com. But the primary source would be LinkedIn for sure.
I will definitely put it in the comments here. And you can find me. I'm Elizabeth Barry. I'm the Kind Communicator, Chief Kindness Officer at thekindcommunicator.com. I have a new book out. It's based on kindness. Please check the both of us out and think about what we created tonight, and maybe bring that into your platform and your opportunity to say yes more and connect with people on a more positive note to make a difference and make an impact on the world, especially right now.
Thank you.